英語聞き流し10分間、名作リスニング、英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語は、ホームページよりご利用いただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com
Chapter 4 The Palace of Night. Some time after, the children and their friends met at the first dawn to go to the Palace of Night, where they hoped to find the blue bird. Several of the party failed to answer to their names when the roll was called. Milk, for whom any sort of excitement was bad, was keeping her room. Water sent an excuse. She was accustomed always to travel in a bed of moss, was already half dead with fatigue and was afraid of falling ill. As for Light, she had been on bad terms with Night since the world began, and Fire, as a relation, shared her dislike. Light kissed the children and told Tylo the way, for it was his business to lead the expedition, and the little band set out upon its road. You can imagine dear Tylo trotting ahead, on his hind legs, like a little man, with his nose in the air, his tongue dangling down his chin, his front paws folded across his chest. He fidgets, sniffs about, runs up and down, covering twice the ground without minding how tired it makes him. He is so full of his own importance that he disdains the temptations on his path, he neglects the rubbish heaps, pays no attention to anything he sees and cuts all his old friends. Poor Tylo. He was so delighted to become a man, and yet he was no happier than before. Of course, life was the same to him, because his nature had remained unchanged. What was the use of his being a man, if he continued to feel and think like a dog? In fact, his troubles were increased 100-fold by the sense of responsibility that now weighed upon him. Ah, he said, with a sigh, for he was joining blindly in his little God search, without for a moment reflecting that the end of the journey would mean the end of his life. Ah, he said, if I got hold of that rascal of a blue bird, trust me, I wouldn't touch him even with the tip of my tongue, not if he were as plump and sweet as a quail. Bread followed solemnly, carrying the cage, the two children came next, and Sugar brought up the rear. But where was the cat? To discover the reason of her absence, we must go a little way back and read her thoughts. At the time when Tyla called a meeting of the animals and things in the fairies' hall, she was contemplating a great plot which would aim at prolonging the journey, but she had reckoned without the stupidity of her hearers. The idiots, she thought, have very nearly spoiled the whole thing by foolishly throwing themselves at the fairies' feet, as though they were guilty of a crime. It is better to rely upon one's self alone. In my cat life, all our training is founded on suspicion. I can see that it is just the same in the life of men. Those who confide in others are only betrayed. It is better to keep silent and to be treacherous one's self. The road to the Palace of Night was rather long and rather dangerous. As you see, my dear little readers, the cat was in the same position as the dog. She had not changed her soul and was simply continuing her former existence, but, of course, she was very wicked, whereas our dear Tylo was, if anything, too good. Tyla, therefore, resolved to act on her own account and went, before daybreak, to call on Night, who was an old friend of hers. The road to the Palace of Night was rather long and rather dangerous. It had precipices on either side of it. You had to climb up and climb down and then climb up again among high rocks that always seemed waiting to crush the passers-by. At last, you came to the edge of a dark circle, and there you had to go down thousands of steps to reach the black marble underground palace in which Night lived. The cat, who had often been there before, raced along the road, light as a feather. Her cloak, borne on the wind, streamed like a banner behind her, the plume in her hat fluttered gracefully, and her little gray kid boots hardly touched the ground. She soon reached her destination and, in a few bounds, came to the great hall where Night was. It was really a wonderful sight. Night, stately and grand as a queen, reclined upon her throne. She slept, and not a glimmer, not a star twinkled around her. But we know that the night has no secrets for cats and that their eyes have the power of piercing the darkness. So Tylet saw Night as though it were broad daylight. Before waking her, she cast a loving glance at that motherly and familiar face. It was white and silvery as the moon, and its unbending features inspired both fear and admiration. Night's figure, which was half visible through her long black veils, was as beautiful as that of a Greek statue. She had long arms and a pair of enormous wings, now furled in sleep, came from her shoulders to her feet and gave her a look of majesty beyond compare. Still, in spite of her affection for her best of friends, Tylet did not waste too much time in gazing at her. It was a critical moment, and time was short. Tired and jaded and overcome with anguish, she sank upon the steps of the throne and mewed, plaintively. "It is I, Mother Night. I am worn out." Night sat up, all quivering. Her immense wings beat around her, and she questioned Tylet in a trembling voice. Night is of an anxious nature and easily alarmed. Her beauty, built up of peace and repose, possesses the secret of silence, which life is constantly disturbing. A star shooting through the sky, a leaf falling to the ground, the hoot of an owl, a mere nothing is enough to tear the black velvet pall which she spreads over the earth each evening. The cat, therefore, had not finished speaking, when Night sat up, all quivering. Her immense wings beat around her, and she questioned Tylet in a trembling voice. As soon as she had learned the danger that threatened her, she began to lament her fate. What? A man's son coming to her palace. And, perhaps, with the help of the magic diamond, discovering her secrets. What should she do? What would become of her? How could she defend herself? And, forgetting that she was sinning against silence, her own particular god, Night began to utter piercing screams. It was true that falling into such a commotion was hardly likely to help her find a cure for her troubles. Luckily for her, Tylet, who was accustomed to the annoyances and worries of human life, was better armed. She had worked out her plan when going ahead of the children, and she was hoping to persuade Night to adopt it. She explained this plan to her in a few words. "I see only one thing for it, Mother Night, as they are children, we must give them such a fright that they will not dare to insist on opening the great door at the back of the hall, behind which the birds of the moon live and generally the blue bird too. The secrets of the other caverns will be sure to scare them. The hope of our safety lies in the terror which you will make them feel." There was clearly no other course to take. But Night had not time to reply, for she heard a sound. Then her beautiful features contracted, her wings spread out angrily, and everything in her attitude told Tylet that Night approved of her plan. "Here they are," cried the cat. The little band came marching down the steps of Night's gloomy staircase. Tylo pranced bravely in front, whereas Tylo looked around him with an anxious glance. He certainly found nothing to comfort him. It was all very magnificent, but very terrifying. Picture a huge and wonderful black marble hall, of a stern and tomb-like splendor. There is no ceiling visible, and the ebony pillars that surround the amphitheater shoot up to the sky. It is only when you lift your eyes up there that you catch the faint light falling from the stars. Everywhere, the thickest darkness reigns. Two restless flames, no more, flicker on either side of Night's throne, before a monumental door of brass. Bronze doors show through the pillars to the right and left. The cat rushed up to the children. "This way, little master, this way. I have told Night, and she is delighted to see you." Tylet's soft voice and smile made Taldal feel himself again, and he walked up to the throne with a bold and confident step, saying, "Good day, Mrs. Night." Night was offended by the word, "good day," which reminded her of her eternal enemy Light, and answered dryly, "Good day? I am not used to that. You might say, good night, or, at least, good evening." Our hero was not prepared to quarrel. He felt very small in the presence of that stately lady. He quickly begged her pardon, as nicely as he could, and very gently asked her leave to look for the blue bird in her palace. "I have never seen him, he is not here," exclaimed Night, flapping her great wings to frighten the boy. But, when he insisted and gave no sign of fear, she herself began to dread the diamond, which, by lighting up her darkness, would completely destroy her power, and she thought it better to pretend to yield to an impulse of generosity and at once to point to the big key that lay on the steps of the throne. Without a moment's hesitation, Taldal seized hold of it and ran to the first door of the hall. Everybody shook with fright. Bread's teeth chattered in his head. Sugar, who was standing some way off, moaned with mortal anguish. Myrtle howled. "Where is Sugar? I want to go home." Meanwhile, Taldal, pale and resolute, was trying to open the door, while Night's grave voice, rising above the din, proclaimed the first danger. "It's the ghosts." "Oh, dear," thought Taldal. "I have never seen a ghost, it must be awful." The faithful Tylo, by his side, was panting with all his might, for dogs hate anything uncanny. At last, the key grated in the lock. Silence reigned as dense and heavy as the darkness. No one dared draw a breath. Then the door opened, and, in a moment, the gloom was filled with white figures running in every direction. Some lengthened out right up to the sky, others twined themselves round the pillars, others wriggled ever so fast along the ground. They were something like men, but it was impossible to distinguish their features, the eye could not catch them. The moment you looked at them, they turned into a white mist. Taltal did his best to chase them, for Mrs. Knight kept to the plan contrived by the cat and pretended to be frightened. She had been the ghost's friend for hundreds and hundreds of years and had only to say a word to drive them in again, but she was careful to do nothing of the sort and, flapping her wings like mad, she called upon all her gods and screamed. "Drive them away! Drive them away! Help! Help!" But the poor ghosts, who hardly ever come out now that man no longer believes in them, were much too happy at taking a breath of air, and, had it not been that they were afraid of Tylo, who tried to bite their legs, they would never have been put back indoors. "Oof," gasped the dog, when the door was shut at last. "I have strong teeth, goodness knows, but chaps like those I never saw before. When you bite them, you'd think their legs were made of cotton." By this time, Taltal was making for the second door and asking, "What's behind this one?" Knight made a gesture as though to put him off. Did the obstinate little fellow really want to see everything? "Must I be careful when I open it?" asked Taltal. "No," said Knight, "it is not worthwhile. It's the sicknesses. They are very quiet, the poor little things. Man, for some time, has been waging such war upon them. Open and see for yourself." Taltal threw the door wide open and stood speechless with astonishment. There was nothing to be seen. He was just about to close the door again, when he was hustled aside by a little body in a dressing gown and a cotton nightcap, who began to frisk about the hall, wagging her head and stopping every minute to cough, sneeze and blow her nose, and to pull on her slippers, which were too big for her and kept dropping off her feet. Sugar, Brad and Taltal were no longer frightened and began to laugh like anything. But they had no sooner come near the little person in the cotton nightcap than they themselves began to cough and sneeze. "It's the least important of the sicknesses," said Knight. "It's cold in the head." Oh dear," thought Sugar. "If my nose keeps on running like this, I'm done for, I shall melt." Wagging her head and stopping every minute to cough, sneeze and blow her nose. Poor Sugar. He did not know where to hide himself. He had become very much attached to life since the journey began, for he had fallen over head and ears in love with water. And yet this love caused him the greatest worry. Miss Water was a tremendous flirt, expected a lot of attention and was not particular with whom she mixed, but mixing too much with water was an expensive luxury, as poor Sugar found to his cost, for, at every kiss he gave her, he left a bit of himself behind, until he began to tremble for his life.
Audiobook. Living in Kyoto by Hidemi Woods. Now on sale in online stores. 44 available distributors. Apple, Google Play, Amazon Audible, or else.
大好評。ヒデミウッズがデザインしたとってもかわいいオリジナルグッズが手に入る。トートバッグ、缶バッジ、ステッカー、T シャツ、トレーナー、パーカー、文具、その他いろいろ、エリゼン .com で見てみてね。erizen.com erizen.com エリゼン .com。
英語聞き流し10分間名作リスニング。英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語はホームページよりご利用いただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com